Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Matthew Ventures. Matt is both an indie developer and AAA game developer, being half of the team behind indie studio Black Vein Pro, as well as a gameplay engineer on Call of Duty Warzone at the moment. He's working with the Raven software team, and he's also, which we're going to get into, he's at internships at companies like Epic Games, Sony, Facebook, and Zynga, and apparently in total 14 internships, which I'd love to talk about. We'll also talk about just the parallels between AAA game development and indie game development, and just hearing Matt's story and his perspective on the industry. So thanks for joining me today, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, Carl. Always happy to chat.
So there's a lot of things. I think you have such a valuable perspective for being someone that's delivered on indie game projects, but being someone that's kind of jumped around big AAA game shoes. I think you've got such a great, you would have such a great experience of the gaming industry as a whole, from small projects to large. I guess I want to kind of just talk a little bit about the beginning of your journey. We can go deeper into what you're doing nowadays with Black Vein Pro, but you've had 14 internships in total in your career that have ranged from Epic, Facebook, Zynga. You worked at NASA for a few years. I'd love to know how you got into the gaming industry and what those experiences were like, if you can touch on a few of the internships and working at those big companies.
Sure, yeah. It's not as fascinating a story. It's pretty run of the mill. But basically, when I was in, when I was in middle school, I was a bit of a troubled youth. I had some anger issues, and I committed a small crime, and I was serving my sentence in detention when the guidance counselor suggested maybe I should put some of my energies to something useful. And this was in high school actually, and he referred me to this guy who was doing some science research at my high school. And that it felt sort of like in the scene from Harry Potter, where like Harry Potter is flying around on his broomstick at a time when he should not. And so Professor McGonagall like sends him to detention, but she's like, you are pretty good at Quidditch though. So in addition to detention, we do want you to try out for the team. So there was a little bit of that going on there, where he put me on the phone with this Canadian team that was working on this software project. And I didn't know very much about coding at the time, but I said I did, and they believed me. And I went up to Canada. I convinced my dad to drive me, and that's when I started doing some coding. And so that was like for healthcare project and some science research stuff. And it was probably later on, maybe a few years later, in my first year of college, when I started making indie games more seriously. That's when I launched my first project that people know about, called No Stranger, which was with my co-founder Scott. So that's sort of when my indie stuff took off, and also when I started doing internships within the games industry versus just tech in general or science in general.
So taking a step back, how did you say that you knew programming, but you had no clue about it? How did you learn? Because I'm someone who works in the games industry, and I wish I was a programmer. I've tried to learn programming. It's such a long process. It's like learning a new language. How did you manage to fool people, or to like learn it fast enough to stay on that path? Are you just a natural genius, maybe? That's what I'm assuming.
No, I don't think so. I think, well, Carl, I'm so fascinated you asked, because this topic of how to learn stuff is one that I am most fascinated with right now, because I think we are really in a renaissance of self-teaching. Khan Academy has been incredibly instrumental, and that's like within the last 10, maybe 10 or so years, right? And we are just going to see even more come to fruition in that regard, because I'm so excited about what it means to have a self-taught education.
Mm.
So for me, it was literally just going on YouTube and finding some coding tutorials when I got stuck. It was a lot of making mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and asking people, online when I found a problem. But I think there's like there isn't an easy formula for it. I think it's just a matter of teaching yourself how to teach yourself. That's the hardest thing, learning how to learn effectively. And I think coding is a unique aspect because it is such a sprawling leviathan of like different topics that you need to at some point figure out how to use Stack Overflow or use the internet Google search to figure out how to make it happen. But there's more resources now than ever before. There's been a recent emergence in game engines like Unity and Unreal that are allowing people to code on their own. And yeah, I was just reached out actually from my alma mater, Stanford. They're doing this program called Code in Place, where anybody can take the Stanford course to learn how to code for free. So
Wow.
maybe that's for you then, Carl. If you want to learn how to program, you could jump on there.
That's amazing. I'm doing a course on Udemy at the moment to learn Unreal, and blueprints in Unreal seem to be a great like way for me to bypass a lot of the programming struggles that I've had. But definitely, I think free courses like that become available, online learning, things are going to surface that people find most easiest to learn through, and the different types of courses, the ones that that work the best are going to become the most popular. So you're right, there is definitely a big push for online learning at the moment. And I like that you spoke about community, about reaching out to people online, asking questions, because I think that you can't really just do it in a bubble. You can't really just do it on your own. You kind of need to put your work out there. And it's interesting. So you spoke about No Stranger, which was your first kind of indie project that you released. Was this the project that became a finalist for the Google Play Design Awards?
Yeah, No Stranger was released to little fanfare and nobody played it really. I think we got maybe 20 downloads over the first week or two, and then out of nowhere it blew up. And tons of people download it. At this point, it's reached over 1 million players. So
That's
that
crazy.
was really what led to it becoming a finalist. Because
So
as
yeah,
much as I think people pretend that might not be the case, like a lot of these award shows are like just popularity versus,
yeah.
there is an element of like if nobody's played it, then it's not going to win any awards, even if it's the best design thing ever.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So No Stranger is like a choose your own adventure kind of text style game, right? Um, what was that like programming? Because I have a few questions just from a game design perspective on what it's like creating, designing a game that has multiple avenues that you can go, and how much thought gets put into just the story behind it. What was that like?
Sure. So my vision for the game was basically I had played this game called Lifeline, which is it's published by Big Fish, and it is a mobile game where at some point the character is going to lay down next to a radiation machine, and he's like, "Hey, if I sleep next to this many radiations, am I going to die? Can you like Google that for me really quick?" And I thought that was so cool, like this idea of having to look up something in the real world that would affect the player in the game, and you got to get him the right information. So that's effectively what I designed the game around, this idea of like you're maybe helping somebody hunt people down and you need to get them the information. And I love this idea of catfish accounts, which were kind of like this big spooky thing going on at the time of like fake Facebook pages that you could just set up of people. And so that was when I brought the project to my co-founder, Scott, who is a writer and studied screenwriting. And he had the ability to turn that into a really cool, compelling narrative.
That's so
So the
cool.
coding aspect is there's a few elements of that. I think it's a lot of just creating random websites on like Blogspot or like Twitter or Facebook and stuff like that. And then the other aspect is just getting an interface where people can chat with NPC.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome first project to do, I think, because you think a lot about what the player's thinking, how the player's feeling, but it's not, system heavy. You don't have to build a whole, online multiplayer system or vehicle system, that kind of thing, which can get really complex as like a first project, which I think that was really cool to see as something that can gain traction and get a lot of attention that wasn't a huge amount of resources. that were needed. So everything that was the external was something that you created. So like a Twitter account, you owned it. You didn't push people to other accounts that you needed to make sure still existed a year later, kind of thing.
Yeah, we owned all of the sites that we push people to, but we tried to cross-reference a lot of other stuff to make it hard to tell if it was fake. So we would reblog stuff on our fake blog from real accounts.
Yeah.
That way people couldn't, to make it sort of blend in.
No, that's cool. No, that's really clever. I'd love to just continue down this kind of black. So you and Scott created Black Vein Pro from then, and is that right? And then that's where all of your indie projects have kind of lived under.
Yeah, so Black Vein Productions is it's something that I think we're still working on, but in a sense, it's sort of supposed to be a title that I could put stuff under, or he could put stuff under. When Scott went to Iraq to do some journalism there, he put it under Black Vein Media. The thing is, with a lot of these companies, there's like some serious gatekeeping going on, where you need a C corporation in order to publish to the App Store.
Gotcha.
So we just have like this company as like the wraparound of all our creative endeavors that are outside of the work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I apologize. I've been saying Black Vein Pro the whole time because I think that's your Twitter handle, but Black Vein Productions. I just want to correct everyone. Black Vein, yeah.
They'll find us. How many Black Vein Pros could there be?
So that's cool. So I did some research as well into so Tony Hawk's existential game. What's the full title of that game? That's
Tony Hawk's Existential Nightmare.
Yeah, so that
it was gonna be the Nightmare, the game, the musical, but we shortened it.
So that is a fascinating game, and I was watching some gameplay of that, and it was hilarious. And this kind of goes into this topic that I want to talk to you about, and that's memes and games, and how the meme culture is affecting game design. Are you, I don't know, are you familiar with memes? Do you like memes, and were memes kind of part of the thought process when making this game, which seems like a hilarious meme in itself?
I think from my perspective, they were not as much. I think it depends like what a meme is. Like memes have changed a lot since my day. Back in my day, memes were like a static image. I know my favorite meme's Insanity Wolf, and like the memes today are like Fresh Shabakadoo and stuff like that. I think it's changed a lot, the meme game recently, and I have certainly not kept up with it. I'm a very old man with respect to that stuff. But I think we're just tapping into the same thing that memes are tapping into, rather than saying we're tapping into memes directly. I think it's just this appreciation of absurdity, and maybe that juxtaposed against stuff that's very serious or very real. I think that I think it's just a fascinating subgenre of incorrect historical fiction is, I think, a fascinating little genre to dive into, and so that's sort of what we're touching upon for sure.
Totally. It's like I think of projects like Goose Game and Lawnmower Simulator, like just games that are kind of a joke in and of themselves, things that people talk about and share. And I think when I was watching the gameplay of the Tony Hawk's Existential Nightmare, it was so unique. Like, what was the thought process behind that, and why did you want to bring that to the world?
Well, I think to go back to your first question, it's an element of, why are people so attracted to memes? And I think it's because it's a very highly condensed, very easy format, especially for something like Twitter or Instagram, for you to really put into a quick reply of a message or something like that. And what's happened recently is there's just so many games coming out, and just media in general, that you really need to be able to gifify your work to get it summarized in a single GIF, moving image, or in a single meme, sticker. Because if you can't boil the game down to its essence in that small little medium, then you're going to have a lot of trouble, I think, expanding upon that. So I think that's one of the challenges, and that's what a lot of game creators are trying to figure out. What is my gifable moment, or how does my game condense down to a one-line pitch, the elevator pitch, or I guess the elevator pitch has been around for a while, but now I don't know what we need another buzzword, don't we? But it's like the elevator GIF or something like that. That's the kind of like the new normal now for games.
Totally. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So it has actually been it was interesting because Ooglets did some really nice write-ups on their development process, because they said, you know what, we're going to start with the GIFs. We're going to have a vision post development cycle, a vision first, where it's like, we're going to figure out what's going to look awesome on Twitter. We're going to be creating that, and then we're going to build the game and mechanics with that always in mind, always at the forefront about how are people who are just here for a single second tuning into the Twitch stream, how are they going to perceive this game? And so I think that is something a lot of people are thinking about right now, and it was part of the development process for us as well. This game, Tony Hawk's Existential Nightmare, was done in 1 week.
Wow.
And No Stranger was done in maybe 4 or 5 months and constantly updated. And then the game that we were working on recently, Do Animals Dream, was in development for 6 months. So comparatively, 1 week is like laser fast, especially given the reach that game has had. And I think that's just another thing. Like, game jams are really popular these days, and like people are constantly pushing themselves to get a game done in 1 week or 1 day. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that with game design especially, there's so many areas that can still be experimented on in terms of different types of game mechanics and different ways to tell stories through games. And I think game jams are perfect for kind of creating a proof of concept. Like, I saw this really cool viral tweet about this this indie game called 2D and Top D, and it was like a 2D platformer mixed with a 3D platformer, and you kind of alternate between two characters that go between two dimensions within the same plane. And it was just a real creative way of gameplay, and I think there's so many areas that can be explored. And I love seeing game jam games because it shows a proof of concept really fast that you can tell straight away. It's like the elevator GIF. It's like, is it something that's interesting? Has it sparked my curiosity? Yeah. One last question I had about your Existential Nightmare game is, did you have any copyright issues, and how did you deal with that going into development? Like, putting an actual title out there that has someone's name in the title.
Yeah, we knew from the start that this would be a fun project to go in between our serious commercial endeavors, if you'll even call it that. We've done a lot of freaky stuff for money, I think, at the same time, like just stupid games. But so we were thinking this game is going to be free from the beginning, and so that's what it wound up being. So the game's free, and we're hoping that Tony Hawk likes it and doesn't sue us. So that's kind of our situation right
now. Because like I guess as long as you put it out for free, there's no inherent risk for you guys.
That is not wholly accurate, and you should talk with your legal advisor if you're considering doing that. I'll tell all the viewers, because that is not quite true. But if Tony Hawk is the blessed soul that he is, and he does not choose to hurt you, then you may look out.
So the decision is to choose someone to use as the face of your game that you believe has a good heart, and
can take a joke, which Tony Hawk definitely can. The guy's hilarious. I love him.
Yeah, and I think that's taking a joke as like people creating memes, and saying a joke about someone is definitely different than trying to build a business and make money off of someone else's name. So talking about your latest indie project, Do Animals Dream, you're working on that currently. You said 6 months in development. What is the premise of that game, and what are you hoping to, or when are you hoping to release it to the world?
The premise of the game, Do Animals Dream, is really diving into what does it mean, how do you define consciousness, and is there consciousness in animals, and how would you go about considering that? What are the implications if it's true, and maybe what is consciousness itself? Like that's the focus of the game. That's what dreaming, I think, is referring to. But I think a lot of people are going to walk away from it with a different theme or a different mantra. It's got different endings that can really influence how the work is remembered. So I think depending on the ending, you might come away with a different message. And I think it'll be interesting, if anything, just to start a conversation. I think that's always the goal with our games, is with NSA Intern, I think our goal was people should really be thinking about how much of their information uh, is online, and no strangers similarly
Yeah.
with in the process of showing people how to like track down and cyberstalk folks. I think there's certainly an underlying message there of like, hey, your government can do this to you, and maybe even anybody can do this to you. So
Yeah.
I think that's always an underlying message of our games, is like trying to start a conversation in pursuit of making something entertaining at the same time.
So, for context, NSA intern, we didn't mention it before, but that was a project that you created that got banned on iOS and Android, I believe. So
Yeah, it's banned there and Steam. Yeah, it got banned all over. But that happens, right? And
yeah,
that's also using the name NSA.
yeah,
So that could have happened for our Tony game.
yeah.
You never know.
Gotcha. So I just want to, so what you were mentioning before about starting a conversation, making people think and maybe being entertaining, to me, that is the definition of what art is. Like with that, when I talk to other creative people that are painters or filmmakers or, um, dancers even, that's the summary of what they're passionate about. And I guess I just want to hear you say it, because this is part of one of the journeys that I'm going through with the podcast is do you believe that that games are art, and is that kind of your pursuit with these projects?
I hate the question, and I get it a lot. I do. I think Shakespeare said, "Would a rose by any other name be as sweet?" Or video games art, I think, falls into the same category. Is pornography truly cinema? Can water be wet? Is Portal a first-person shooter? And of course, the age-old question: is a hot dog a sandwich, or a burger, or even perhaps a taco? I think at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter. It's people are gonna come up with names and genres to define the works, and as a developer, it's irrelevant. The only time that a genre or something some sort of nomenclature like that is relevant is for those brave folks working at GameStop who need to decide which shelf should our game be on. That's the only relevance, and it's reductive in intent, because they're just trying to boil down some essence of it, right? But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's a silly question, I think.
I respect that, and I think you're right. I think my production mind wants to categorize the world and categorize the future of where gaming is going. But I think you're right. If what my takeaway is from this is that if you have a feeling or something that you want to convey, a conversation that you want to start, um, that you can do that through games. That you can create a game called Do Animals Dream, where you explore some of these weird thoughts and strange, uh, just
Sounds accurate.
yeah, just. But what's great is that it's on one side it can be pointless and entertaining, but on the other side it could be really thought provoking and enlightening, and can really make someone change. Is it coming from like a vegan vegan activism standpoint? Are you hoping to make people feel sorry for animals that might not have the best you know life at the moment? Is that an angle that you want to take it?
I think the vegans are at the forefront of asking a lot of these questions for sure, because I think if you acknowledge that animals can endure a lot of suffering and that they may be conscious, maybe they don't want to die, for example, or maybe they feel pain when they're mutilated or cut and killed. I think it becomes very hard to knowingly be complicit in that violence.
Totally.
I have a very strong conviction that if people had to manually rape their cows to make them produce milk, or had to manually slit the throats of these animals to harvest their meat, then they probably wouldn't do it. They'd be like,
Mm,
why am I killing and raping my animals? This is fucked up. But
yeah.
I think our job is not to say what's right or wrong. I think our job as artists is to pose the question.
Yeah.
And I think some people are going to walk away from the work saying this is what it's about. Some people are not. I think some of my favorite works of all time, Carl, have been works that have really moved me and maybe pissed me off. Like maybe I totally disagreed. Like one of my favorite games of all time is That Dragon Cancer. I think it's an amazing game, but I totally disagree with it. But I had a visceral reaction. You know, it really moved me, and that was epic, even if I hated it. So I feel like that's what I'm looking for. I want to start the question. I want to get a response. I want people to feel something and maybe learn about, you know, their own opinion on the matter in the process.
I love that. That was really cool to hear. I'm going to definitely check out that game, and I love that you had such a visceral reaction to it, and that's what it's all about. And I think that encapsulates perfectly why indie game development is so popular. And that's where a segue that I'd like to go now into AAA, and how I feel like that same feeling and energy that you just had is probably not as prevalent in big projects that have thousands of people working on them. What is it like working at AAA studios? How do you find that contrast to working on No Stranger, from working on that to working on Fortnite? What was that experience like?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can say that's definitely not true. There are people in AAA who are just as passionate about indie work. And I think there is often a divide between what is an indie project versus what is AAA. Again, that's one of those silly definitions, right?
Yeah.
But it is actually a really tight-knit group. It's a really great relationship. We talked earlier about the emergence of so many more resources for people to learn how to code and stuff. And that has led to a real renaissance of game development. You know, maybe ever since the Xbox Live Arcade, you know, with Blow's game. But I think like people are now creating mods, and mods like Arma 2's Battle Royale mode are turning into games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which was led by PlayerUnknown, right, the modder, which are then turning into you know, modes within huge games like Call of Duty.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a symbiotic relationship between the indies and the AAA people.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you know, Minecraft, the biggest game of all time right now, was an indie game for sure, made by like one guy. But from where? He didn't come out of nowhere. He came right out of King, which is one of the biggest. That's under ABK, but it's one of the biggest you know, AAA game companies out there. So I feel like the AAA industry is taking in that creative talent like Marcus Persson. And then, you know, if they have a crazy idea they want to pursue, they might go out and create an indie game. They might do it internally by creating, you know, there's been a lot of innovation within the AAA stuff. For example, I've seen incredible work from the Naughty Dog team in terms of accessibility for gaming and creating, just like we've seen this renaissance, creating a whole new audience for who can create games. Now there's a whole new audience of who can play games just because of the emergence in accessibility. So I think that's a really exciting symbiotic relationship between all these different factors and like how they're working together. And the biggest difference though between an indie game development and AAA game development for me personally has been working with the number of people, because AAA games traditionally are made by a lot more people than an indie game. That's one of the distinctions I normally would think of. And so I have to say, Carl, when I was playing games, I had aspirations to make the games that I love playing. But I realized that sometimes, and this is a weird thing, but your favorite games to make are not necessarily your favorite games to play. So I loved really small, bespoke, personal experiences, games that told me about somebody's unique story, like That Dragon Cancer or The Beginner's Guide. However, I actually like working with people. And so those kind of 1 or 2 person teams are not as exciting to me as the ability to work on a team that might have 300 different contributors and allows for people to be hyper specialized. I've gotten to work with lighting artists, one of the favorite disciplines for me to collaborate with, because these are people who just think about light all day, and it's so fucking cool to work with them and see how their minds work. So I love that. I love working on big teams, which is not, you know, even if my favorite games in particular of all time to play are usually like these small little bespoke walking simulators. Not to say that I don't love, the latest AAA releases, because you have to as a gameplay engineer, certainly. But
Totally.
yeah.
And I love that they can both coexist. And I love that that is the gaming industry, that it has that whole spectrum of games. And I think you make a good point. It's so cool that we can, it's similar to how I imagine the film industry being, how you can get together with your friends and make a short film one weekend, or you can work on the next Avatar movie with thousands of other people and $100 million budget. It's a similar thing where it's nice that they can all coexist and everyone's passionate about that one medium, whether it's film or gaming, and everyone can kind of relate and communicate, and there's a community in there, and I think you're right. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some hurdles unique to our medium. If you sit down to write a book, and maybe a famous writer like Stephen King sits down to write a book, it's probably going to look pretty similar. You might both use Microsoft Word or something like that, right? But in the games industry, there's so many different technologies that engines are really helping, especially these ones like Unity or Unreal, because now they're putting the tools that would traditionally be only accessible for like a AAA team into the hands of anyone. And that's not to say anyone can't go out and make their own engine. Certainly, a lot of people have. However, it takes a little bit of expertise, and it is a little bit difficult, and it does take more time. So it's nice that it's becoming easier than ever to make games.
With that experience that you've had going to all these different companies, and some companies, I'm sure you've had internal engines that you work on, some probably use Unity or Unreal. Do you have a clear preference, or do you think that there's pros and cons in both, in terms of, because companies they used to guard their own technology, and some still do, to make their games iconic to their workflow and their look, but now engines like Unity and Unreal, do you kind of support that more or less? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, I like to say it like this, because a lot of people don't really understand the function of engines, right? But it's sort of like if you go to somebody and if I were to come to you and say, hey, I need you to make a document for me. Here are some of the options. You have Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, or Microsoft Excel. Well, those are all very different, right? You'd probably want to, I think there's maybe three key things that you'd want to think about when identifying what engine, or in this case, what document editor you want to use.
Yeah.
Which the first one would be technical specifications. So you might want to know, what do you need to make in this engine? And that's going to be a big difference, right? So for Microsoft Word, may not be the best fit for graphs. Maybe that if you're going to make a graph and plot some data, that might be better for Excel. Similarly, the Unity engine has a much better 2D support than something like UE4. And they're working on that, right? But that's probably not as good as a hyper specialized custom engine, which might take more time to build, but you can get further performance gains on that. The next question would be, this is also part of sort of technical specifications, but it's like, what are you trying to ship to? So for, if it's a document editor, you might want to know if you're trying to get a PDF format. That might determine if you should use Microsoft or Excel. Or if it's a CSV, then you're almost definitely going to use Excel. For an engine, that might be like, hey, are we trying to get to Switch or PS4 or mobile? It's a big question to face. Then the other thing is just the logistics of that, right? So like the licensing and the tool integrations are all going to be a factor. The reason why I've made indie games with Unity is because there is so many tools out there and learning resources for Unity. It's really easy to get ramped up on that. And I've just found like different engines are more or less difficult to understand, right? Like I found Unreal Engine, even when I was working for Epic, I never really hit a state of flow with the Unreal Engine. Like I did not work too well in it. But in custom engines I've worked in, I've had a super great time. So it really depends on like the engine and how it's set up. I think part of generalizing an engine is meaning that it's not going to be the best solution for any one thing as a result of that. So that's kind of what's going to happen is, as an engine becomes more generalized, it's going to become obviously less specialized, and that will be to the fault of, I think, very necessary performance stuff, which is important, right? So if let's say you're the technical director of Naughty Dog, your job is to make Last of Us 3. You know, you need to make and you want to show off the PS5's capabilities. That's the whole reason you're a first-party studio. So there's no way you're going to be using a third-party engine. You're going to be creating your own engine so you can get every single inch of performance out of that engine that you can, because that's your job. You need to show off what a PS5 can truly do.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why, I think that's another major consideration. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is the team's experience. So if the team has never coded in C++ before, you're going to want an engine where you can just work on the scripting layer, like Unity, where you don't have to worry about the C++ under it. And that's why I think Unreal Engine is really nice, because they have a visual scripting language, blueprints. And that's actually usually how it breaks down. So almost every game engine will have 2 layers of code. They'll have the coding and they'll have the scripting. Scripting is a little bit higher level. It's for stuff that doesn't need to be as performant, and can be iterated on faster. So you might even be able to do a live reload of script. That's pretty often, right? But with coding, almost all engines are coded in C++. I think every single engine, except maybe some stuff in Rust that I've been hearing about, but it's almost all C++. And for the reason that, like, there's few languages that can get as performant as C and C++.
No, that's awesome. And it's really valuable information from my perspective. Not being a programmer, it's really valuable to understand those kind of key areas. And you just made it, you summed it up really clearly, and I definitely understand it now. So one question I have is say that I have decided that I want to pursue gaming as a career. I haven't thought of a game that I want to make. I just know that I play a lot of games. I want to make games. I love I love Matthew Venture's attitude, and I want to be like him when I'm older. What advice would you have for someone, like you were saying, it all depends on what kind of game you're creating, and what engine you use is dependent on what kind of outcome you want. What advice would you have for someone that doesn't really know any of that yet, and doesn't know what they want yet? How would you suggest that they take the first step into game development?
Well, I think you can do some wandering, right? I think there's a quote from The Hobbit that not all those who wander are lost, and that's certainly true. You could do a little bit of wandering, but if you want to get to a destination, you need to know where it is. So the first goal might be to define where are you trying to get, because if the goal in mind is to create an indie game on your own, that's a very different goal than trying to get hired for a game studio. And then within that, you might want to consider, if you're going to work at a AAA game studio, you've got to specialize to some degree. So you need to figure out, okay, I'm a game developer, sure, but am I an artist, or am I a coder, or do I do a little bit of both? Or am I a designer, or do I do a little bit of design and coding? Maybe I do a little bit of design and art. Those are all different positions. Maybe I'm a writer. Maybe I don't do any coding at all. I just want to write the stories of the games. That's an awesome position in itself. So I think people probably have a good idea of if they are a coder or an artist. And if maybe they're a little bit of everything, then maybe doing an indie game where you're playing all hats, or working at a smaller company where you have greater autonomy to maybe play multiple roles, maybe that's a better fit than working in a big engine where you're like one cog in the wheel. Yeah. So I think those are all considerations. But assuming, you pick, for example, okay, I want to be an engineer, and I like working on the stuff that the player interacts with. So I don't want to be a network engineer or a tools engineer, or a core dev engineer. I want to be a gameplay engineer. So we've narrowed it down to engineer. We've narrowed it down within engineer to the discipline within engineer. Then you have to say, okay, what a great game dev engineer, what do great gameplay engineers do? And then we need to figure out, who are some great gameplay engineers? Oh, let me look at John Carmack. Let me see who that is. Let me look at Jonathan Blow. Let me see who that is. Let me look at Elon Ruskin and see what he does. And then, maybe the question is, okay, what kind of problems are they facing? Now, how can I start approaching those problems? And maybe the first step would be to do something like following the tutorial in an accessible engine like Unity or Unreal, and trying to make a little thing on your own, So for example, if you see that there's a really cool mechanic like the God of War, so for example, in when I was working on God of War Ragnarok, there's one guy on the team who did all of the engine all of the gameplay coding for the weapons in the game. So there's this iconic section of that game where you can throw the axe and it'll spin back and he'll catch it. And it's awesome. It's epic. And it is probably the project I've seen the most on YouTube of people trying to clone that guy, George Mall's work, and trying to figure out how he did that and how are they going to make their axe in their game look similar. So that might be a first step to try and, replicate what already is existing. And then naturally you might go off of that a little bit. You might say, okay, that's how I would throw an axe and have it return to me. Well, what if I threw 2 axes and had them return to me, or something different? They slowly build on the idea until it's something of their own.
Totally. And that's the whole creative pursuit. You want to be influenced by someone that's inspired you, and you want to iterate on it. You want to do something different, do it better, or do it with your spin on it. That's really, really amazing advice. And I love that you referenced all these different people and all these different programmers. And that really just proves to me that you love what you do. You love the community that you're in. And I just really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your references, because I think that's going to be hugely inspiring for other people seeking a similar path, which I speak to many programmers on a weekly basis that I think can really benefit from hearing someone who's deep in the roots of the industry and are that passionate and still passionate and producing games on a monthly basis. And yeah, it's just very inspiring. So thanks for that.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, there's a lot more resources these days than ever before, right? So anybody can go on YouTube, maybe watch some GDC talks. Those can be interesting. And just read people's blogs about like how they're implementing stuff. There's a lot of cool discussions going on there. Unfortunately, a lot of it is, hidden behind the walls of corporate secrets. But I think more than ever before, people are sharing how they're solving tough problems. And the Unreal Engine is totally, the code base is there. So you can go in there and you can see how the entirety of Unreal is coded. That's amazing, right?
That's crazy.
That's one of the best parts about working in UE4.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to make sure I don't miss out on asking you is, I saw when I was doing research on you that you took Mark Zuckerberg's desk when you were working at Facebook, and you said that there was a story behind it, and I'd love to hear it.
It's true. Yes. Well, I was working at Facebook at the time. It was my first day on the job. And I had asked my boss, where should I set up my computer and everything? Where should I start getting to work? And, he surveyed the office, and it would turn out that there was a desk sort of in the middle of the office that had nothing on it whatsoever. It looked like it hadn't been sitting on in months, which is probably the case, frankly. So he was like, well, I don't know, that desk looks free, head on over there. So I go up to the desk, I set up my laptop, my computer, and I start punching some numbers into doing the code thing, right? And then this big burly man comes up to me, and this is not my lead. So I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And he's like, hey, who the hell are you? And it turns out that this desk was specially reserved for Mr. Zuckerberg. And this has been publicized on articles, but he has a lot of fake programmers who work around him who are not actually programmers. They're like trained ninja assassin bodyguards who just look like they're programmers, and like they'll come up to you, and they're always watching his back, so he's always well armed, I guess. So they told me get the heck out of here, and I gave him his desk back and moved somewhere else. But that's the long story short, I suppose.
That's incredible. You almost died. I'm sure.
Almost. I am sure he would have did some kung fu on me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I lucked out.
That's hilarious. And I think it's so incredible. You worked at NASA for a few years. What was that experience like, and what did you get up to there?
NASA was interesting. I got to actually look at like 2 complete opposite things. On my first foray into NASA research, I looked at ocean water temperatures. And then in the next summer, when I was doing some research for them, this was at Queensborough Community College under my PI, Paul Marchese, Dr. Paul Marchese. I then got to look up at the stars, and I did some studies on the sun and coronal mass ejections or solar flares, which is basically when the sun has like these explosions on the surface that send out particles, protons, and neutrons to screw with our satellites. And it's a really big issue because if the satellite is on when these particles shoot through, it could break it. So you
Wow.
want to turn it off just in time before all these crazy subatomic particles shoot through. So that was an exciting problem to work on because they're trying to create models to predict the coronal mass ejections based on the solar flares, which is a
Wow.
very tough problem. And I tried to help a little bit, but ultimately I think they're still working on it. So it's a tough problem for sure.
That's crazy. And I think that's just one example of how programming can solve problems in the world, automating things and getting data and using that to, detect things like that. That's such an amazing thing. And I'm sure there's millions of things in the world that can be solved through programming. You've worked at, NASA, you've worked at social media companies, you work in gaming. Do you see quite a close correlation between programming for games and programming for software?
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually think we are in a situation right now where people are realizing how powerful games are as a medium
Hmm.
to captivate the attention of people and to keep them excited and engaged and oftentimes delighted, with this kind of stuff that they're doing. So gamification is a big movement now where they're trying to take software and processes that maybe don't traditionally have games involved and figure out what learnings from game design, from UI design, um, from UX design, can we integrate into our systems to make it more accessible, to make it more awesome, and
Hmm.
and to make the world, less frustrating in some ways, right? So I think what we're taking away from games is basically looking at games just as interactive media, and interactive media comes in all shapes and forms. And I think there's a lot of ways that it can
Hmm.
that it can be used to make everything else better,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think I'm hearing the word interactive media a lot
Yeah.
nowadays. I think, especially at a government level, when it comes to governments are catching up on terms of what is gaming. How do you kind of categorize it? And interactive media is a great way to kind of put everything under that umbrella in terms of providing funding to organizations that are creating tools for education or uh, you know solving problems through gamification and using game design tactics. They have game designers on their team, but they work for a completely different industry. And I think interactive media is a great umbrella to fit that in. And in New Zealand anyway, that's something that is slowly becoming more adopted at a government level because there needs to be more funding in the gaming industry. But it kind of slips through the cracks. In New Zealand, the film industry gets a ton of funding, but gaming is almost making more money than the film industry, but it's getting avoided in all the kind of funding rounds. So it's an interesting conversation, and I like the word interactive media. I feel like that does a great job of summing up all the different kinds of innovation that's happening.
Yeah, I think we're seeing games in ways that I don't think we've ever anticipated. Like, or maybe people have seen it but didn't expect it to come this soon. But I remember the Pokemon Go
Yeah.
craze was really exciting, just to see so many people engaging with the alternate reality game of walking around in the real world, and I think
Yeah.
that's really exciting too. So we're probably going to see more of that. Like, just how can gaming be turned? Those were not originally game developers. Those folks came from Google, so it was just a traditional,
Mm,
engineering company. But they were like, what would be an awesome game to turn onto this? And they
mm,
created their first game from Niantic. And
mhm.
then with the lightning IP like Pokemon, the thing took off like no tomorrow. So I think that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to note as well. It's just as technology emerges, as new ways of communicating become apparent. I mean, VR and AR hasn't even hit, like there's thousands of people around the world building experiences and tools inside VR and AR, and it hasn't hit the mainstream yet. And once it does, it's going to introduce a whole new wave of content, of ways of experiencing the world, ways of playing games, ways of doing your work. It's gonna it's going to really just disrupt a lot, I feel. It's inevitable.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited for the future of games. It's bright.
Yeah, I think that this conversation's been a super well-rounded. I've loved your perspective on everything from your experience in indie all the way to AAA, and you've done such an amazing job at not picking a side. You know, you've really just broken down the, what the distinctions, the distinguishments are between what a big studio is and what a small studio, and how they're similar in a lot of ways. And you've really just made me appreciate the gaming industry as a whole. And I just really appreciate your the time that you've taken to explain that and shared your passion with me and on the podcast. And I know it's going to impact a lot of people. So thank you so much for coming on. Is there any last bit of anywhere you'd like to point the audience listening to that they can go deeper into your work? Like Do Animals Dream, for example, wish listing that on Steam. I think at the moment you can do.
That would be awesome. Yeah, check out Do Animals Dream on Steam. That's gonna be great. And if anybody is a game creator out there and they create something that they think is epic and awesome, then definitely send it to me on Twitter. I would love to check out the work that you guys are doing, because just like Carl said, whether it's indie or AAA, we're all on the same team.
Totally. And your social media handle is at Mr. Ventures, is that right?
That's me.
Sweet. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Matt, and really appreciated the conversation. I'm still digesting a lot of what we talked about. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, and take care and have a good rest of your day.
Catch you later. Bye.